It's far too early to say what caused the Ethiopian Airlines flight to crash. Former and serving pilots I've spoken to say the crater and debris suggest it descended fairly vertically and at some speed. A modern aircraft crashing twice in 5 months is highly unusual. Airlines and passengers will want reassurance. Tom Burridge, BBC News.
Well, Seth Kaplan is an aviation journalist. He joins me live from our Washington studio. Seth, welcome to you. Thanks very much for being with us here on BBC News. From what we know and what you've heard in the reports that we've just had on in the past few minutes, what's your assessment, your analysis of what may have gone wrong here?
Yeah, well, there's certain very broad similarities with that other crash we've heard about back in October, in the sense that both crashes perhaps involved something to do with speed, but it's far from being able to say that it's the same cause. In this case, we're talking about perhaps erratic vertical speed as the plane was climbing back in October with Lion Air. Issues, as we heard in that last report, related to airspeed, speed relative to the ground, errant readings perhaps, which caused that new system to try to prevent a crash, and instead, along with perhaps actions of the pilots, caused it. In this case, you kind of have less information so far to work with, because with the other case, there were these reports that in prior days, the plane had experienced something similar. And that things hadn't gone tragically wrong. In this case, no reports of anything like that so far. Seems that everything had been normal, as far as we know anyway, up until this crash.
What do you make of the fact that the pilot in this case did report difficulties and asked to return?
Right, so that tells us that this wasn't something, extraordinarily sudden. It doesn't mean, for example, at this point they've said, they can't rule out, let's say, terrorism, can't rule in anything either, but it wasn't anything so sudden that the pilot didn't have time to radio. If we remember, Malaysia Airlines Flight 17, for example, the one that was in that case shot out of the sky, or a very sudden bomb, the pilot here knew that something was wrong. Very experienced pilot, as we're hearing, and had in fact asked for permission to return. The good news here, and if you can say that about a tragedy like this, is that we are going to find out what's wrong. This is not, well, to cite another mystery, Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, where 5 years on we still don't know. Not only is there plenty of information so far, albeit preliminary information, but this plane crashed on the ground. You have a debris field, and that too makes things easier. When a plane, even in not terribly mysterious fashion, crashes in the water, it can be years before you even have the debris field, have the black boxes. In this case, I think this is going to be a situation where within days, weeks, we start learning, at least in generalities, what might have happened here, although the full investigation will probably take years.
We were hearing about this stalling system on board this relatively new plane, and the fact that some pilots may have not known about an override button. How much training do pilots get when a new plane is brought on board?
Significant training. It's a new type, and just as switching from two older models, from one to the other, a pilot would be completely retrained. Same thing. The irony, Samantha, just to sort of explain it a bit more, is that system was designed to prevent something that had caused previous crashes, some very famous ones. Viewers might recall Air France Flight 447 off the coast of Brazil 10 years ago. That was because pilots in that case feared a stall and did what you're not supposed to do. Something that, if you're not a pilot, you would think if the plane's stalling, you would try to pull back on the stick, which makes the plane go up, right? Not stall. But actually, you're supposed to dive into a stall. That was a famous incident where pilots didn't do that, forgot their training, perhaps. Another one that year, a small turboprop plane flying on behalf of Continental Airlines back then, same cause. And so there was all this interest in having automated systems to prevent this, to take over and say, no, let's go ahead and dive into the stall to regain airspeed, which then, in fact, lifts the plane back up. But in the Lion Air crash, at least partly, and there's still this dispute about whether the pilots simply reacted poorly, at least partly that system seemed to have played a role, although it is possible to override that system. In that case, the airline accused Boeing of, and this goes to your question, Samantha, sort of not doing enough to communicate in its manuals how the system worked. And airlines redoubled their efforts, as we heard earlier this hour in one of the other reports. The U.S. FAA said, hey, pilots need to know more specifically what to do here. But to be clear, all of that, we understand that it played some role still, at least in the Lion Air crash, way too early to know whether that anti-stall system had anything to do with this crash.
OK, Seth Kaplan from Airline Weekly, thank you.